Part 2. The Ember's Heart. The drive to the farm was 5 miles of pure tension. Ava pushed the cruiser to its limit, the familiar curves of the road feeling alien and threatening. Every shadow seemed to hold a figure, every glint of sun off a distant window a sniper's scope. The picture on Thorne's phone had been a violation of the deepest kind. Her home, her sanctuary, was now just a target on a map. The rage that had galvanized her in the motel room now simmered into a cold, focused fury. She turned onto the long gravel driveway, kicking up a plume of dust. The farmhouse looked exactly as it had in the picture, deceptively peaceful under the afternoon sun. But the image was burned into her mind, a reminder that they were being watched by an enemy with reach and resources. Her dog Buster was still on the porch, but he was on his feet now, his tail giving a few tentative wags as her car approached. He wasn't barking. Whoever took the picture had been silent, professional. She left the cruiser running, its presence a comfort, a direct line to the world of law and order that felt a million miles away. "Stay," she commanded Buster, who whined but obeyed, settling back onto the porch boards with his head on his paws. The barn stood 50 yards from the house, its red paint faded and peeling. It was her father's domain, a place of organized clutter, tools, tractor parts, hay bales, and decades of accumulated memories. The box she was looking for was in the old tack room at the back, a place that hadn't seen a horse in 40 years and now smelled of dust and dry leather. She slid the heavy barn door open, the screech of its runners loud in the quiet air. Sunlight streamed through the dusty haze inside, illuminating dancing motes of hay and dirt. Her father had been a man of routine and order, but his father and his father before him had been men haunted by a secret. The legacy of that secret was tucked away in forgotten corners, like a splinter in the heart of the family. She found the box on a high shelf, just as she remembered. It was an old wooden footlocker, bound with rusted iron straps. It wasn't locked. It never had been. The contents weren't valuable, only heavy. She lifted it down, her muscles straining, and set it on a workbench. A cough escaped her as a cloud of dust billowed up. She pried open the lid. Inside, nestled in yellowed cheesecloth, were the relics of Stefan Kowalski's life. His Polish birth certificate, stiff and brown. His American citizenship papers, the ink faded but proud. A heavy silver crucifix on a tarnished chain, its surface worn smooth by a lifetime of anxious prayer. And at the bottom, wrapped in a separate piece of oilcloth, was a lump of something heavy and dense. She unwrapped it. The piece of anthracite was the size of a human heart, its surface a maze of sharp, unnatural angles. It wasn't the dull, dusty black of normal coal. It shone with a deep, liquid luster, as if it had swallowed the light and was holding it captive. It felt cold in her hand, a profound geological cold, but as she held it, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration seemed to pass into her palm. A low thrum of dormant energy. Kaloniglo. The heart of the coal. This was the catalyst. The piece of the Gideon's domain that her great-grandfather had stolen away, a souvenir from his descent into hell. She rewrapped it carefully and clutched it to her chest. She had what she came for. As she turned to leave, her eyes swept across the barn one last time. Everything was in its place. The tractor, the neatly coiled hoses, the row of shovels against the far wall. Except one shovel was out of place. It was leaning against a hay bale, not hanging on its hook. And on its blade was a smear of fresh, dark earth. Ava froze. Her father was meticulous. He would never leave a tool out, especially not a dirty one. Her blood ran cold. Someone had been in here. Recently. Her hand flew to her weapon. She moved silently, her training taking over.
She scanned the barn, the loft, the shadow in the corner.
Nothing. But the feeling of being watched returned, 10 times stronger. They hadn't just taken a picture. They had been on her land, in her space. They were testing her, showing her how close they could get. She backed out of the barn slowly, the lump of coal clutched in one hand, her pistol in the other. Her eyes darted around the property. The house.
The woods at the edge of the fields. The road.
Nothing seemed out of place. But the displaced shovel was a screaming alarm. It was a message. We are everywhere. She got back in the cruiser, tossed the wrapped coal onto the passenger seat, and slammed the door. She didn't look back at the farmhouse as she sped down the driveway. It no longer felt like home. It was the front line, and she had just retrieved her weapon. While Ava was racing to her farm, Elias Thorne was engaged in a different kind of battle, a war of forgery fought with a ballpoint pen, a cup of cold motel coffee, and the focused intensity of a man whose life depended on his academic skills. He needed a decoy. Something that looked and felt like the real journal, enough to fool the man in the church, even for a few minutes. That was all the time they would need. He'd driven to a 24-hour pharmacy and bought the closest thing he could find, a cheap, leatherette-bound notebook, a set of fine-tipped pens, and a small watercolor set meant for children. It was a pathetic arsenal, but it would have to do. Back in the motel room, he worked with feverish precision. He placed the genuine journal on one side of the small desk and the blank decoy on the other. His first task was aging the paper. He brewed the strongest, darkest coffee the in-room machine could manage and, using a wad of toilet paper, carefully stained each page of the new notebook, dabbing and streaking it to mimic a century of water damage and foxing. Then he used the hairdryer, blasting each page until it was dry and brittle to the touch. The result was surprisingly effective. The paper now had the sallow, sickly look of old parchment. Next came the text. He couldn't possibly copy the entire journal. He focused on the key sections his adversary would likely check first. The first page, with Reese Price's name and the date, 1866. A few mundane pages from the middle about coal tallies. And most importantly, the final frantic pages detailing the binding ritual. His hand, which had once crafted meticulous lecture notes, now flew across the page, mimicking Price's cramped, slightly slanted script. He copied the Welsh phrases phonetically, not knowing their meaning but understanding their power. Galw ar ysbryd y lle. Call on the spirit of the place. He drew the complex diagrams, the interlocking circles and triangles, the spidery sigils that made his skin crawl. He worked in a state of heightened consciousness, the world narrowed to the two books and the space between them. The irony was not lost on him. He, who had been cast out of academia for his unorthodox theories, was now using the most traditional of scholarly skills, paleography, textual analysis, forgery, to save his own life. The final touch was the cover. The cheap leatherette was too smooth, too perfect. He took his car key and scraped it across the surface, creating scratches and gouges. He bent the spine back and forth until it cracked. He used the dregs of the coffee to stain the edges, rubbing it deep into the fake leather. After an hour of frantic work, he was done. He placed the two journals side by side. The original had a weight, a presence, that the copy lacked. It was like the difference between a real Rembrandt and a perfect print. To a casual glance, however, in the dim light of a decaying church, it might just pass. It would have to. He tucked the real journal into the hidden lining of his laptop bag and placed the decoy on the bedside table. He stood up, his back screaming in protest, his eyes gritty from concentration. The room smelled of burnt coffee and fear. His phone buzzed. It was Ava. "I have it," she said, her voice tight and strained. "But they've been here. At the farm. They're watching us." "I know," Elias said, looking out the window at the setting sun. The sky was turning a bruised purple and orange. "Time's up. Where are you?" 5 minutes out. Meet me at the entrance to the graffiti highway. Don't go to the church. The plan has changed." "What's the new plan?" Elias asked. "We're not giving him the stage." Ava's voice was like steel. "We're taking it. The fight isn't at the church. It's at the cellar. We're going on the offensive." Elias looked at the decoy journal, then at the real one hidden in his bag. going on the offensive. He liked the sound of that. For the first time since he'd arrived in Centralia, he felt a flicker of power. He wasn't just a victim, a pawn in someone else's game. He was a player, and he was about to make his move. They met where the sane world ended and Centralia began. Ava pulled her cruiser onto the gravel shoulder just behind Elias's Bronco, the setting sun glinting off her windshield. The sky was bleeding color, casting long, distorted shadows across the cracked and graffitied road. The air was getting colder, and the plumes of steam rising from the earth seemed thicker, whiter, like the breath of a sleeping beast. Elias got out of his truck, the fake journal clutched in his hand. Ava emerged from her car, holding a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her face was a grim, determined mask. The fear was still there, in the tightness around her eyes, but it was overlaid with a hard shell of anger. "This is it," she said, nodding toward the bundle. "The $1 million lump. It feels cold." "Good," Elias said, his own nerves stretched taut. "That means it's dense with energy. It'll make a good battery." He held up the decoy. "And this is our distraction. It's not a perfect copy, but it should buy us time." Ava laid out the plan, her voice crisp and professional, the voice of a cop briefing her partner before a raid. "Our friend is waiting at the church. He thinks we're scared, that we're going to walk into his trap. He's arrogant. We use that against him." She pointed her chin toward the Bronco. "We drive your truck up the road toward the church. Not all the way. We leave it about a quarter-mile out, where it's visible from the church steeple. We'll leave the decoy on the front seat, plain as day. He'll have a spotter," Elias reasoned. "They'll see us arrive." "Exactly," Ava said. "They'll see the truck. They'll see us get out. And then they'll see us walk, not toward the church, but into the woods. Toward the cemetery." Elias nodded, understanding. A misdirection. "He'll think we're trying to flank him, or maybe that we got spooked and are making a run for it. It will sow confusion. And while he's trying to figure out our play, he'll send his man to get the book from the truck. And while his goon is busy with the truck, and he's watching the woods," Ava finished, her eyes glinting in the twilight, "we're not in the woods. We'll have doubled back. We're going to the cellar. We're going to reinforce the binding." It was a good plan.
A dangereux plan. It relie don speed, stealth, and the enemies overconfidence.
"What about when he figures it out?" Elias asked. "When his man reports the book as a fake, or when he realizes we're not emerging from the woods near the church?" "By then," Ava said, her voice grim, "it'll be too late. The ritual will be done.
Or we'll be dead."
"Either way, the game will be over." They didn't speak again for a few minutes, the weight of their decision settling upon them. The historian and the trooper, about to perform an ancient magical ritual to fight an unknown enemy for the soul of a dead town. It was madness. It was their only hope. They drove the Bronco down the cracked highway, its headlights cutting through the deepening gloom. The graffiti on the road seemed to mock them, a chorus of silent, colorful screams. They left the truck where Ava had instructed, a lone beacon in the desolate landscape. Elias placed the fake journal on the passenger seat, its cover visible through the window. Then, they began their performance. They got out, looked nervously toward the distant skeletal silhouette of St. Ignatius Church, and then made a great show of jogging into the woods that flanked the road, heading in the general direction of the cemetery. They ran for 100 yards, deep enough to be swallowed by the trees, then cut sharply left, circling back toward the road under the cover of the dense undergrowth. They moved like ghosts, all sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. The ground was treacherous, soft, and unpredictable, with hidden fissures venting hot, foul-smelling steam. They reached the edge of the woods again, a half-mile from where they'd left the truck. From here, they had a clear view of both the Bronco and the church on the hill. Elias pulled out a small pair of binoculars. For a long time, nothing happened. The sun sank completely below the horizon, and the world was plunged into a deep, starless twilight. The only light was the faint, eerie glow from the headlights of the Bronco. Then, he saw movement. A dark shape detached itself from the shadows near the church and began to move down the hill. It was too far to make out details, but it was a man, moving with purpose. He was heading for the truck.
Showtime, Elias whispered.
They waited until the figure reached the Bronco. They saw the glint of a flashlight, the sound of shattering glass carrying faintly on the wind. The man was inside. "Now," Ava hissed. They broke cover and ran, not toward the truck, but away from it, sprinting across the open ground toward the depression in the earth that marked Reese Price's cabin. Every step was a gamble. They were exposed, silhouetted against the dying light. But the enemy's attention was focused elsewhere. They scrambled down into the foundation, their feet slipping on the loose earth. The cellar entrance gaped before them, a black, waiting mouth.
You ready for this?
Ava asked, her breath misting in the cold air. No, Elias admitted honestly. He pulled the real journal from his bag. Let's do it anyway. He clicked on his flashlight, its beam cutting into the darkness. Ava was right behind him, the heavy lump of coal held tight in her hands. They lowered themselves into the cold, silent dark of the cellar, leaving the world of cars and guns and logic behind. They were entering the world of the GWYLL, and they had come to knock on its cage. The air in the cellar was colder than before, and thick with a palpable sense of dread. It felt ancient still, a pocket of time that had curdled and gone bad. The beam of Elias's flashlight cut a nervous path across the stone walls, illuminating the frantic, clawed words. Silence. It sings. Kolsky. This is the spot, Elias said, his voice a hushed reverie. He directed the light to the center of the earthen floor, to the dark, circular stain and the intricate web of sigils carved around it. The locus. The heart of the binding. Ava knelt, her knees protesting against the cold, damp ground. She placed the oilcloth-wrapped bundle beside the circle. What do we do? Elias opened the real journal, its pages seeming to absorb the light from his torch. He found the page, his finger tracing the elegant, desperate script. Okay. The ritual is an invocation and a reinforcement. We're not trying to talk to it. We're reminding it of its prison. He laid the flashlight on the ground, angled up so it illuminated the space. First, the catalyst. The vessel of the first fire. It has to be placed in the exact center of the circle. Ava unwrapped the lump of anthracite. In the confined space of the cellar, it seemed even darker, its sharp angles drinking the light. It looked less like a rock and more like a piece of solidified night. As she leaned forward to place it on the central sigil, a low hum filled the air. It wasn't a sound that came through their ears, but a vibration that resonated deep in their bones, in their teeth. The cellar seemed to drop in temperature by 20 degrees. Did you feel that? Ava breathed, pulling her hand back as if burned. It's waking up, Elias whispered, a mixture of terror and awe in his voice. It feels the catalyst. It recognizes it. He consulted the journal again. Next, the invocation. I have to read this passage aloud. It's a declaration of dominion. A restatement of the original binding. He took a deep breath. The words were a mix of Welsh and what looked like a bastardized form of Latin. He didn't know the meaning of every word, but he understood their intent. It was a legal notice. A spiritual eviction order. He began to read. An gawf dialan dot enen reatherwimid, atgif nerthwanakadwini. By the pact of stone and the silence of the deep, we name you bound. As he spoke, the humming intensified. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing in on them. A foul smell, like swamp gas and ozone, filled the small space. The edges of the flashlight beam seemed to flicker and warp, as if the darkness itself were pushing back. Keep going, Ava urged, her eyes wide, scanning the shadows that writhed and danced just beyond the light. Elias's voice grew stronger, more confident, as he continued the recitation.
Non vocatus, non impitur, point desealis not broken, point deslimbris not undead, point bitname of price, we command you, point bitname of Jones, we command you, point bitname of Evans, we command you.
He read through the list of the original founders, his voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Each name seemed to add another layer to the oppressive energy in the room. The ground beneath them began to vibrate. Small pebbles skittered across the floor. A trickle of dirt fell from the ceiling. The GWYLL was fighting back. "It's almost done," Elias said, his eyes glued to the page. The final piece. The offering. The blood of the one who broke the chain. He looked at Ava, his face pale in the gloom. "It's you. A single drop, onto the catalyst. That's what seals it. It turns your ancestors' defiance into the new lock on the cage." Ava didn't hesitate. She pulled a small pocket knife from her belt. She took a steadying breath, held her hand over the impossibly black lump of coal, and pricked the tip of her thumb. A single, perfect sphere of dark red blood welled up. At that moment, a whisper slithered through the cellar. It was the same voice Elias had heard on his recording, but clearer now, more menacing. A dry, sibilant hiss that seemed to come from all around them. "Kolsky." Ava flinched, her hand jerking back. The whisper was full of ancient hatred. "Don't listen to it," Elias yelled over the growing hum. "It's trying to stop you. Do it now." She closed her eyes, steadied her hand, and let the drop of blood fall. It hit the surface of the coal with a sizzle, like water on a hot skillet. For a heartbeat, it glowed with a brilliant crimson light, stark against the blackness of the anthracite. The light flared, and the humming, the vibration, the foul smell, it all stopped.
Silence. À trous, anti-silence.
The oppressive weight in the air vanished. The shadows settled back into their corners. Did it work? Ava whispered, her voice hoarse. Elias looked from the journal to the now inert lump of coal. I think so."
The binding fil. Stranger.
Colder. A slow, deliberate clapping sound echoed from the cellar entrance above them. They both froze, spinning around to face the opening. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the night sky, just as the facilitator had been. But this was not the same man. This man was slender, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit. He was not holding a crowbar. "Bravo," the man said, his voice a smooth, cultured tenor with a faint British accent. "Truly, a magnificent performance. A bit rustic for my tastes, but the passion, the desperation. It was all quite authentic." He descended the stone steps with a graceful ease, as if he were walking into his own drawing room. He stopped at the bottom and smiled, his features becoming clear in the flashlight's beam. He had sharp, intelligent eyes, a neatly trimmed silver goatee, and an air of absolute, unshakable confidence. He looked more like a university dean than a villain. "My apologies for the theatricality of my associate," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward the world outside. "He's a blunt instrument, but effective for retrieving lost property. Unfortunately, it seems you led him on a bit of a goose chase." He glanced at the decoy journal, which he now held in his hand, and tossed it contemptuously onto the floor.
À clévé, if amateurish, forgerie. Who are you?
Ava demanded, raising her pistol, her hand surprisingly steady.
The man's smile widened.
"My name is Julian Croft," he said. "And you, Sergeant Kowalski, Ms. Legacy. And you, Mr. Thorne, the disgraced historian, have just made my work significantly more complicated." He looked at the circle on the floor, at the blood-anointed piece of coal. His smile faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of genuine annoyance. "You haven't just reinforced the binding," he said, his voice losing its pleasant tone and taking on a dangerous edge. "You've woven a new thread into it. Her bloodline." He looked directly at Ava. Price and his fools used their own life force as the key.
You veux juste med use key.
To undo this,
I can't simply break the lock.
I'll have to destroy it. He took a step forward. So, I will ask you once, very politely. Give me the catalyst, he said, pointing at the lump of coal. And you, he looked at Ava, will come with me. We have a decoupling to perform. Go to hell, Ava spat. Croft sighed, a sound of theatrical disappointment. I was afraid you'd say that. He raised his empty hand, his palm facing them. The air around his hand began to shimmer, to distort, like heat rising from asphalt. The low hum returned, but this time it wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from him. You think you're the first to read from a dusty book and think you understand power, he sneered. You are children playing with matches. I have been studying the GWYLL, and entities like it, my entire life. I don't bargain with them. I collect them. The air in the cellar crackled with energy. Elias felt the hair on his arms stand on end. This was not a man who needed a crowbar. He was the weapon. The binding is strong now, Elias said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. You can't touch it. You can't touch us. Croft laughed, a genuine mirthless sound. Oh, my dear boy. You reinforced the cellar door. You paid no attention at all to the walls. He snapped his fingers. And from the dark earthen walls of the cellar, pale, grasping hands began to emerge, clawing their way out of the dirt.